The quadratic formula. We have looked at a couple of ways to solve quadratic equations. First, if it was a simple problem to factor, we could factor and use the zero product law. Second, we use the square root method. If we have something squared equals some constant, then we could take the square root of both sides. Our third technique is the quadratic formula, which is listed here. X equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Notice you do have your plus and minus in there. You're going to get two solutions. This formula can be used to solve any quadratic equation. I would be careful and not jump to this formula first. If it looks like an easy problem to factor, you have less chance of making a mistake there. If it's a hard problem to factor, definitely go to quadratic formula. Make sure your quadratic equation is in standard form, so you want a 0 on one side. You want to pick off your coefficients, pick off your a, b, and c, so that the formula will be easy to use. Our a is 1. Our b is negative 5. Remember that sign is part of the coefficient there. And our c is 3. Now we'll work with our formula. So x equals negative b, so negative of negative 5, the opposite of negative 5, plus or minus the square root of negative 5 squared minus 4 times a, which is 1, times c, which is 3, all over 2 times 1. Right, see, there's lots of places you could make a little mistake in there, so be careful. Opposite of negative 5 will give us positive 5 plus or minus. Negative 5 squared will give us 25. 4 times 1 is 4 times 3 is 12, so 25 minus 12. 2 times 1 is 2. So we'll finish under the square root. It's going to give us the square root of 13. So we have 5 plus or minus the square root of 13 over 2 for our solutions. For our next problem, we are in standard form. We have the 0. We have a quadratic equation. We will pick off the coefficients. 7 is the a. Negative 2 is the b. And our c is 1. So x is equal to negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. So opposite of negative 2 plus or minus the square root of negative 2 squared minus 4 times 7 times 1 all over 2 times 7. Now we'll clean up. This will give us 2 plus or minus the square root of negative 2 squared is 4. 4 times 7 is 28 times 1 is 28. So this will be minus 28 all over 14. So what kind of solution are we going to get if we have a negative radicand here? Complex solutions. So let's go ahead and finish simplifying. We have 2 plus or minus the square root of negative 24 over 14. And this we can take out our I. I'm going to do the 24 on the side. 24, if we break it down, we can do 4 times 6, and 4 is some 2's, and that would leave 2 times 3. So we're going to be able to take out a 2 and the I, and it will leave 6 underneath. So 2 plus or minus 2i times the square root of 6 over 14. We have a little bit more simplifying that we can do because our 2, our 2i, and our 14 all have a common factor of 2. So we can divide by 2. 2 will go into 2 once. 2 will go into this 2 once. You don't have to write the 1 because you have an I there. And 2 into 14 will go 7. So we will just rewrite it. It is 1 plus or minus I times the square root of 6 over 7 is our solution. We have another quadratic equation here. I would look at this one real quick to see if it would factor first because it's a simple trinomial. But you're looking at 25. You're not going to be able to get anything that multiplies to give 25 and adds to give 8. But think about it. All right, so we'll go ahead and use the quadratic formula. Pick off your A, B, and C. A is 1, B is 8, and C is 25. Right, I'm going to plug directly in since I have the formula up here. So x equals negative 8 plus or minus the square root of 8 squared minus 4 times 1 times 25 all over 2 times 1. We'll simplify. Under our radical, we have 64 minus 100. Looks like complex solutions again, a negative radicand. So negative 8 plus or minus the square root of negative 36 over 2. 36 is a perfect square, which will be 6, and we have the I. So we have negative 8 plus or minus 6i over 2. Again, these are all even, so we can divide out a factor of 2. And that will simplify to negative 4 plus or minus 3i. It's over 1, so we don't need to write the 1 in the denominator. Our next equation is not in standard form. It needs to be in standard form before we can use the formula. So we're going to need to move that 5x. So we have 3x squared minus 5x plus 2 equals 0. Then we can use our formula. So our A is 3, our B is negative 5, our C is 2, and then we're set to plug in. So x equals negative B, so opposite of negative 5 will be 5 plus or minus the square root of negative 5 squared minus 4 times 3 times 2 all over 2 times 3. Clean up. So we have 5 plus or minus 25 minus 4 times 3 is 12 times 2 is 24 over 6. This will give us square root of 1, which is 1. So I'm going to go ahead and just do that. So I have 5 plus or minus 1 over 6. We can clean this up. So break it apart. 5 plus 1 is 6 over 6 equals 1. And 5 minus 1 is 4 over 6, which will reduce common factor of 2. 2 will go into 4 2 times. 2 will go into 6 3 times. So I have two solutions, 2/3 and 1. I'm not going to work the next one out. If you want to pause the video right here, you can take a minute and work it yourself, and then I will give you the answer. For my simplified answer, I get negative 3 plus or minus I over 2. We're going to need to do some work on our next equation before we get to standard form. First of all, you want to get rid of those fractions. Pick out your common denominator, looks like a 7. Multiply through by 7 to get the fractions out of there. So 7 here, and 7 on this side. Right, so we'll clean up. We have x squared minus 7x, and this will give 2. We'll subtract the 2 equals 0. Now we'll pick off the a, b, and c. So a is 1, b is negative 7, and c is negative 2. You could think about factoring. This is not going to factor. Your choices are 2 times 1. So we'll go ahead into our quadratic formula. X equals negative 7, so it will be 7 plus or minus the square root of negative 7 squared minus 4 times 1 times a negative 2 all over 2 times 1. We'll simplify, so we have 7 plus or minus negative 7 squared is 49. And this will be 4 times 1 is 4 times 2 is 8. And the two negatives will be plus over 2. So we have 7 plus or minus the square root of 57 over 2. I don't think there's anything you can do there. We have one more equation. This one also has some fractions, so we're going to get rid of those fractions. Pick out your common denominator for 4, 2, and 3. It looks like a 12 to me. So we're going to multiply everything by 12. Remember, you use it on the top. And we're going to clear those out. So 4 will go into 12 3 times. 3 times 3 gives us 9x squared. My 2 will go into 12 6 times. 6 times 1 is 6x. So minus 6x. My 3 will go into 12 4 times. It's on the other side, so we'll subtract a 4 equals 0. A is 9, B is negative 6, and C is negative 4. So I have x equals opposite of negative 6. So it will be 6 plus or minus the square root of negative 6 squared minus 4 times 9 times negative 4 all over 2 times 9. So 6 plus or minus the square root of 36. Two negatives will give us plus, and I have 16 times 9. Gives 144. And we're over 18. We have 6 plus or minus the square root of 180 over 18. We'll break that 180 down on the side. We could do 18 times 10. And 18 is 2 times 9. 10 is 2 times 5. And my 9 will keep going. Right, you actually have two squares in here. You are getting a 2 from your 4, and you are getting a 3 from your 9. So a 2 goes out and a 3 goes out to give you 6 on the outside times the square root of 5. So we have 6 plus or minus 6 times the square root of 5 over 18. We can simplify a little bit because these outside factors all have a common factor of 6. So we can divide by 6. 6 will go into 6 once. 6 will go into 6 once. 6 will go into 18 3 times. So we have 1 plus or minus the square root of 5 over 3.